Hello, and welcome to the first lesson. So, in this lesson, we are doing gestures and simplifying the body. And what I mainly want you guys to understand is shapes and proportions. So, I'll be using LocalBlackGal as an example. Her TikTok is Kinky Sluts. So, you may know her from there. But she's a really awesome cosplayer, and she gave me permission to use her cosplays as example to use throughout the course. So basically, I'm just showing you guys a simplified gesture of how to make up the body and what I personally do and the shapes that I make. So typically, I make a little like skeleton of the body, like mixture of a stick figure, and I draw lines in between to show distance between the form. So for example, I'll draw a line right there for the distance of the feet. That way that I can measure out the proportions of where her legs are supposed to go based upon the reference. Now, I don't always follow the guideline of the reference. I like to, push it a little bit more, basically break the body just a little bit, but each your own. If you like more realistic drawings, have at it. You follow it to a T. Just don't get lost into it. I feel like if you search for or try to do realism too much, it gets kind of boring, and it also stifles your creativity. So I say be as loose as possible with drawing. But basically, I just separate the body into these basic shapes, and those are the shapes that I tend to amplify. So the pink represents the muscle groups that I tend to form. Right here, I'm showing how I measure out the head. So I like to view it as a triangle. And if the top of the head, not counting the hair, but like the skull, is higher than the tip of the triangle, that means that the head is too big and that you got to shrink it in order for it to fit perfectly within the shoulders. So now that the head is proportional, which is most important, because your eye is going to go to the face, and that is exactly why I like to draw the head last, is that you get the body and the figure formed first. Same thing with why you want to draw the figure before you putting on clothes, is that you don't want to, even though I just said you want to break the body, I don't mean it in a displacement way with water. You want to draw what the body's going to look like underneath. That way it looks natural and it doesn't look off-putting to the viewer. You want it to sink in together. And that's why you still draw the full figure instead of drawing a part of the figure and then drawing the clothes on top, and then drawing, like if you draw the torso and then you draw a skirt and then you draw the legs, you may have the legs completely disconnected from the hip. So here I'm just using the blue as like the guideline for like the second muscle group that I tend to focus on, and then the purple for the inner line gap between the thighs. And basically I just really use two major shapes to form the torso. I use it as I draw it as an hourglass figure, and then I mainly draw a M to represent the top of the torso, and then a W for underneath the pec line. And I'll explain that a little bit more down the line. But those are the basic shapes. And then for the pelvis, I basically just draw a underwear line, a panty line, as the simplest way to draw that part of the body. Overall, these are basically just shapes that I like to focus on the most whenever I draw the figure. I tend to like, that's why my stuff tends to be like maybe a little bit too muscly. I like drawing certain muscle groups. I like drawing certain shapes. So I mean, that's basically where it comes from, is that I studied biceps and the triceps. Are they accurate looking? No, but I studied those. I draw the shoulder lines, and basically I just drew it enough to how I personally like to draw it and feel comfortable with it. So like here, I'm basically showing the proportions of the body split up in easier ways. So like the shoulders, I'll draw spaces in between, or I'll have spaces in between, but basically the shoulders are 2 triangles, and then the arms and forearms are just cylinders, as well as the thighs, and you have that like chest plate type of top for the chest, and that basically just signifies the M and the W, and then that connects to the abs down below with the panty line. So that's essentially just the basic shapes of how I draw the figure. And then the reason why the M is so high is because you still have the sternum, and then that leads down to the pec. It works for both male and female red models or figures and characters that you want to draw. It's just that you would change the shape of the torso. Instead of an hourglass or a strong hourglass, you would make it like more of a top heavy kind of Dorito shape for the male figure. And over on this side, I'm basically just showing the underlining of the blue part of, like, if you were to go into details, you would literally just draw several W's down below using a solid straight line from the tip of the M, which represents the collarbone, and you would literally just have that be the center part of the ab lines. And that's basically just how I draw abs. Although it's subtle, the shading that I'm doing, the very soft shading I'm doing, is basically how you would paint the figure eventually down the line. We'll get into that more so in the coloring and painting part of the class. But for shapes of the body, you want to paint it in a way like a cylinder. You want to have it to where you have the darker part of the cylinder and then the highlight in the middle. But that's all stuff we'll go over later. Right now, I'm just using that as a way to highlight how these basic shapes fit into the figure. Now, I use green here to basically be a way to establish the outer abs, the side abs, the external obliques. So I wanted to show that basically, like, if you have a figure that is thin enough or fit enough, that those are the muscles that you will see right there, and they are also very easy to connect to as well. They basically just connect to each other. All the shapes connect to each other. You can view them as like specifically the side abs as a bunch of flower petals connecting to each other in a way. Like, that's the kind of shape that they are. So now we're going to move on to another reference photo from LocalBlackGal. And this one I really wanted to use because, one, I love this cosplay, and two, you don't see her legs, and I wanted it to be very apparent why you should still draw them. They don't have to be in detail, but at least you'll know where it is on the proportion of the body. Instead of just drawing the arm and the chest, you should still draw the figure in not as full as form, but at least a gesture of where the proportions go on the body. That way that you have a better understanding to where the bottom parts of your dress or your skirt are supposed to go, or how the fabric eventually will shape around the object. So I really just wanted to create create a quick gesture and study off of this picture itself, and basically just highlight that point, because I feel like a lot of people probably wouldn't draw the legs for this cosplay just because it's covered completely in fabric. They would just immediately go into the dress. But I say that you should still draw, even if you can't see it, you should still draw it, because it can help you with understanding the flow of the fabric, the flow of how poofy or a certain direction of where the dress is supposed to go. And you wouldn't have that volume or understanding of volume when you don't draw what is hypothetically underneath. Well, we know legs are underneath, but you as an audience, or for your audience, they won't see that, but you have to build upon it as if it's something that they'll see. So I'm basically just doing the same thing as what I did in the other reference picture, and I'm just highlighting the muscle groups that I tend to draw the most, and just showing the shapes and the shortcuts that I use to create the figure. So in this part, I wanted to break the figure just a little bit more in understanding the gesture. So once again, like before, I separated the cylinders, the triangles, and we're just going to call it the body armor plating for the chest, and the panty line, and just showcase that the simplest of shapes can create the body and its form. It's not as complex as I think a lot of people think, it is very detailed. However, the breaking down of it for someone to understand it is not as difficult as one would think. I think just looking at the form, people think that it's overly complicated, overly like you have to be a master in order to be able to draw the body. And I always say that if you can draw a stick figure, you can draw the body. That's why I start with the stick figure at the very beginning with the boxes and the little round pelvis. It's because it's not. It's literally at its basic form of what I draw. It's just I amplify it by adding a couple of more shapes that make it into what I draw currently. And here are my little notes that I wrote that are probably really small to see. I literally just wrote how the top of the body armor part just represents the rib cage, how the M at the top of the body armor part represents the collarbone, and how the top of the panty line is actually the very top of the hip bone, and how that for a woman that is basically the waist of the body, and then right there, but it's literally like a small inch where somewhere within that space of the waist is the belly button. And even on a man or male red models, it's the same placement as well. It's just not as obvious to notice because there is they have a lower waistline. They don't have a higher hourglass figure, so it's not as easy to pinpoint it as, say, on a female red body. But that is just another guideline to figuring out how certain body parts are going. However, I did learn that another way to easily spot where the belly button is on a man is on the very last ab line. So the very last W on the, whether it's the second or third part of the fourth or sixth pack, that is where the belly button is on a male red model. So I'll show you guys that part in the building of the muscle, where we'll use more male references from Pinterest and whatnot. But basically, I'm just, once again, just highlighting parts of the body that I find to be a little easier with certain shapes to create. That at the end of the day, you don't have to draw in super detail the muscles. I'll teach you how to draw the muscles, or at least build the muscle. However, you don't need to draw those shapes in order to have a dynamic figure. A lot of things involving drawing mainly have to do with repetition. You continue to draw it over and over again until you either memorize it or at least have a certain aspect of understanding what you're drawing. And that is basically what I want you guys to get from this class, is that repetition's important. Go and draw the figure like this so that you have an understanding of the body and its shapes.